Before we get started, please remember this podcast is for general educational purposes only. We're not providing medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always consult your own healthcare provider about your care. Welcome to Fertility Nurses Unfiltered. 2 nurses, 1 mic, no bullshit.
I'm Ashlee LaRue, fertility nurse and founder of Fertility.
And I'm Laura Wepler, fertility nurse and founder of Navigating Fertility with Laura.
You got questions, the internet has a lot of opinions, but what you really need is 2 fertility nurses who aren't afraid to tell the truth.
No scripts, no sugarcoating, just honest, evidence-based nurse-to-nurse conversation. So let's get into it.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Fertility Nurses Unfiltered. I am so excited to have this conversation today. So if you've been with us since the beginning, which is, 6 weeks now, 7 weeks, this is our first guest episode, and I can't even tell you how excited I am. Today we have Dr. Angela Lawson. She's a clinical psychologist and reproductive mental health specialist. Dr. Lawson and I work together. So yeah, I told you I was going to do this. I was going to call you Angela. I had the pleasure of working with you at Northwestern, and I will never forget. I remember sitting in the room with the nurses, and you came in and you presented your research that you had done on stress. And it has stuck with me since. You said, if stress was a true factor in success, that we would have died out in the caveman era.
Right.
So Dr. Lawson, you've been a clinical psychologist now for 16 plus years. You were the former professor of OBGYN and Psychiatry at Northwestern in Chicago. You're a researcher on the psychological aspects of infertility, and you're the past chair of the mental health professional group at ASRM. So welcome to the show. I'd love for you to just kind of give a brief introduction of yourself for our audience.
Sure, I'm happy to. And thank you for having me on. I'm excited and honored to be the first guest. So I was at Northwestern for almost 16 years. I was embedded in the fertility clinic there. And at Northwestern, back in the day, what we used to do was have any patient who was going through any of the more advanced kinds of fertility treatments, so IVF, gamete cryopreservation, so egg freezing, sperm freezing for whatever reason, or patients who were engaging in third-party reproductive treatment, like working with a gestational carrier, an egg donor. Everyone met with one of the psychologists prior to starting treatment to try and help prep patients for coping with how stressful infertility and its treatment can often be. And that's sort of how I got my way into this kind of research that I just from the very beginning, my very first day in the clinic, every single patient every single day would talk about how they believed that their stress was the reason why they were sitting in front of me that day and in the clinic at all. So I'm a nerd. I always like to find answers to things, and it was something that I needed an answer for. And some of my research focused on that, some on other areas. So I'm really excited to be talking about stress and fertility today, because there's just so much that is untrue about stress and fertility that is talked about online and just socially in groups.
Yeah. And Ashlee and I have, we've both been clinic nurses, and then we've both worked with patients outside the clinic as well. And I think every patient that I talk to, this is a concern. And I'm always repeating what I learned from you. And I think patients don't believe me that, I think it does help calm the anxiety, but I think there's this level of skepticism because that's what's been pushed down their throat, from social media and, who knows, maybe they're REI, maybe they're OBGYN, I don't know. Yeah. Because I know one of the studies that I saw that you've done even looked at providers' beliefs around stress and infertility.
Right. Including OBGYN's beliefs around stress and fertility. And while that particular study found that a smaller percentage of OBGYNs as compared to non-OB trained physicians believed stress caused infertility, still the majority of OBGYNs that we surveyed believed that stress played some sort of role in infertility or pregnancy loss.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
crazy.
That's so
Well,
crazy.
it is until you realize that actually in residency, in OBGYN residency, at least as far as all of the REIs that I've ever spoken to, so fertility doctors, REIs, every one of them said they never got any training or education in their residency for OBGYN that talked about what the research showed and didn't show with regard to stress. So OBGYNs then are getting the same sort of series of myths that the rest of us have been told. Just because they're OBGYNs doesn't actually mean that they got any kind of different education about that particular topic than the
Yeah.
rest of us lay folks did.
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
That's so crazy. It's such a big part and it's such a big conversation that patients have, right? Is the stress of it. And not only that, this causes stress thinking about not stressing about it.
Yeah.
Right?
Right? It's like this cyclical
Yeah.
disaster that's happening is,
Yeah.
now we have to worry about being stressed because stress is causing my infertility
Right.
or causing issues. But
Right.
now I have to be stressed about being stressed.
Right.
And yeah, I think one of the things I've heard before is that, I've heard people say stress doesn't cause infertility, but prolonged stress can have impacts, right? And that's very general and, where's that coming from, right? But I'm curious what what would be the definition of prolonged stress, right? Like I think about somebody going through years of IVF or a fertility journey. And they're like, yeah, I've been stressed for years. I've been going through 5 years of infertility treatment.
Right.
Like, what does prolonged stress even mean? And is that even a real thing?
So chronic stress and acute stress are real things, but there is no scientific definition that everybody agrees on in terms of what counts as acute and what counts as prolonged or chronic. Is it anything longer than a day? Is it anything longer than a week, and so on? And all the research is pretty diverse in terms of what those scientists say they're considering acute versus chronic or prolonged stress. But at the same time, what I would say is the argument is, and there's biologically, from that perspective, it makes sense why people might believe that chronic or prolonged stress could affect fertility, right? When we are experiencing stress, there is this kind of cascading response that happens in our brain where there's a release in stress hormones. And the belief is that this release in stress hormones, for example, cortisol,
Right.
happens to inhibit our reproductive efforts at any particular time. So if we go back to caveman times, Laura, you referenced that earlier, right? If we're trying to escape the saber-toothed tiger that's running behind us, I and my body don't really need to think about, can I get pregnant? I need to find the closest tree and climb as fast as I can. And so it's really this battle between two systems in our body called the sympathetic and the parasympathetic systems. They are sort of colloquially called the feed and breed system and the fight or flight system, right? And when we're in fight or flight, when we need to survive because we're experiencing stress, that the belief was that this feed and breed system is inhibited in such a way that it prevents us from getting pregnant or that it could cause pregnancy loss. But to go back to the example that Laura was talking about, if stress, whether short-term or long-term, acute or chronic, had the ability to affect the survival of our species, we would have died generations ago. And if the chronic stress associated with being in fertility treatment affected one's ability to get pregnant, there would be 0 pregnancies from IVF.
Yeah.
Or IUI or whatever kind of treatment there might be. That what we know at a minimum from some of the research that we have is, if nothing else, fertility treatment is more powerful than stress, right?
Yeah.
I don't want people to be stressed going through fertility treatment, but given that most people are stressed going through fertility treatment and we still have good pregnancy rates, right? That clearly fertility treatment is more powerful. But the other thing I say to people is if stress had the ability not just to affect the survival of our species, right? If stress had the ability to negatively affect a clinic's pregnancy rates. I mean, clinics care about patients, but they care about pregnancy rates, right?
Yeah. This is a really good call out.
Yep. So if clinics believed that stress could negatively affect their pregnancy rates by even 1%, fertility clinics would be set up very differently.
Yeah,
Every
they
clinic
would.
is going to have
Yeah.
multiple mental health professionals on staff, and they'll make people actually go to therapy, whether they needed it or not. They'll have acupuncturists on staff. A lot of people believe acupuncture will help you get pregnant. The research doesn't show that either. But fertility clinics would all have acupuncturists on staff, and they would make everybody go to treatment, even if they had needle phobia. If all of these supplements that people talk about online change chances of pregnancy by even 1%, clinics would have fancy supplement bars or have their own supplements that they would sell, and they would get even richer, right?
Yeah.
And they're not doing this. They're
Yeah.
not doing this.
And they
And
would have
research-
pineapple farms. I always
Oh
say,
my
right?
gosh.
Yeah.
I would hope that they would just give out free McDonald's French fries.
Well, that
would be my
too.
Yeah.
favorite.
Yeah, that one too.
I mean, that'd be a way to bring patients in.
Right? Right?
Oh man, all of that is such a powerful call out.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
And I think about like, who isn't chronically stressed these
I
days? I mean,
know.
quite honestly, like if you just think about and this goes for the general population, but even in America, right? Like we work to live. Like we don't,
Yeah.
or we live to work. We don't work to live.
Yeah.
Like we are go, go, go. If you have children, you know, you're running your kids around everywhere all the time. You're managing a job. Like I feel like my watch all the time is like, you had a stressful day. It told me yesterday, it was like, you had a stressful day. I'm like, I don't remember being stressed, but
Yeah.
I live in fight or flight mode.
Oh, I'm sorry. my couch is open.
Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about like what the research has shown, because I think
Sure.
this is where, you know, patients do their own research,
Yeah.
right? And Google and the internet are just full of misinformation. But even if somebody did come across research articles like from ASRM, right? I did like this deep dive. There are articles that show or have said that there was a correlation between outcomes and stress levels. And so, you know, I would love to kind of talk about how they got these results. I looking at them, right, I see some flaws right off the bat with how these studies were conducted.
Yeah.
But I would love for you to speak on that, because clearly somebody's going to go out there, they're going to be listening to this, they're going to go out there and they're going to be like, well, I found this article and that is like, she's lying.
Sure. So there's a couple of areas of research that people are likely going to see talked about online on social media. You know, one area of research is about correlating, which is basically, is there any kind of relationship between two different pieces of information? And so this particular area of research looks at levels of stress hormones and how long it takes you to get pregnant, or levels of stress hormones and does somebody have a pregnancy loss, right? And that research is probably the most inconsistent research of all the research in this particular area. There's a bunch of studies that show absolutely no relationship, and then there's a bunch that show that there is. And that is so confusing when you see that, right? And that's basically every area of research, right? The reason why in many cases you see that happening is, look, research is hard to do. I know that. I am a researcher, and some kinds of research are harder to do, like a randomized control trial. And we can't do randomized control research studies in some of this work because it would be unethical. For example, to stress a group of women out and see who gets pregnant and who doesn't, right? We're not going to do that.
Yeah.
But because we can't really do randomized control trials, which are imperfect anyway, but still better than nothing, what we're left with is the kind of study where somebody fills out a paper and pencil questionnaire and says, I experienced this amount of stress, and then it took me this many months to get pregnant. And then maybe they do a blood draw and they assess your cortisol levels. And the largest set of research in the area of stress hormones and pregnancy outcomes is from one particular study that has now published over 100 individual articles on the same set of data, taking just one piece of that data at a time and correlating it with chances of getting pregnant. It's a very, very poorly designed study. And we call that salami publishing when somebody does that, right? And there's a lot of problems with that kind of research. But this particular study, some of the problems associated with that study is they didn't assess for all of the other realistic things that could make it difficult for somebody to get pregnant and that might be associated with stress. So for example, in this set of literature and in every single set of literature, and I have reviewed hundreds upon hundreds of studies for various of my publications. So there are either no research studies, which is my current belief because I haven't seen any, that actually control for some really important variables, or maybe there's some and they're just so small I haven't seen them. But for example, there are two medical diagnoses that, regardless of whether or not somebody's trying to get pregnant, have a higher rate of depressive and anxiety disorders associated with those two diagnoses. Those two diagnoses also make it difficult or more difficult for people to get pregnant. And nobody has ever designed a study where they said, hey, maybe we shouldn't include these people who might be depressed or anxious, and it has nothing to do with their chances of getting pregnant. Maybe it's just the disorder that they have causes this increased risk. That's not happened. So the two disorders are PCOS and endometriosis.
Right. That
So
my
people
immediate
with
thought was endo.
Yep. People with PCOS and endometriosis are scattered throughout these research studies, and you don't know why then they're feeling depressed or anxious. Is it simply because of the hormonal dysfunction associated with PCOS or endo? Is it because they're experiencing infertility? We don't know. Is it it's
Or
a
the
chicken or the egg?
pain. The
Or the
pain
pain,
is
right?
yeah.
Exactly, right. And so we have no idea for people with PCOS or endo whether or not it's the PCOS or the endo that's making it hard for them to get pregnant, or if it's the anxiety or depression. But there's also a much bigger group of patients that nobody has ever taken into consideration. And that's patients who've been told they're probably not going to get pregnant and have a baby. So poor prognosis patients are probably going to be depressed.
Yeah.
And they're probably going to be anxious. And they're also probably not going to get pregnant because they already had a poor medical prognosis.
Yeah.
But to put those women in these studies as well and say, oh, see, look, it's being depressed or anxious that is why they're not getting pregnant, without really understanding and controlling for the effect of understanding one's prognosis and or one's diagnosis, we can't rely on any of that research.
Yeah.
And that research again is one area, but the area that I think tends to get mostly spoken about online are some randomized control trials do exist about relaxing and getting pregnant, right? And if you tell somebody they should just relax and they'll get pregnant, you should take a step back because they might swing at you, right?
Right. Well, we wouldn't, I mean, we wouldn't have infertility clinics, right? Because if we all just like took a beach vacation and like got busy,
we could all just relax and get pregnant. And thank you for saying that, because you actually just hit on the reason why I think, not why all of this research exists, but why we talk about stress in the way that we do. And I'll get to that. It's suspenseful. But the research on relaxing and getting pregnant, we actually can conduct randomized control trials on that area, because that's not harmful to somebody to ask them to do something relaxing and see if you get pregnant or see if you don't get pregnant, right? And so that research sounds like it's the truth with a capital T, that a randomized control trial found that if you relax by going to therapy, for example, that you'll get pregnant. And so first, what I will say is, if going to therapy helped people get pregnant, I would be rich beyond belief. That would be the most magical of powers that I could ever have. And I would love to have that, right? Actually, I'd just love for everybody to be able to get pregnant who wants to get pregnant.
right.
But I don't have that magical power. And I think I'm okay as a therapist, right? But that research is just as flawed as the studies on stress hormones. It similarly doesn't exclude people with PCOS or endometriosis, or people who know that they have a poor prognosis, right? And there's a variety of other really problematic aspects of these randomized control trials. And a lot of people, I think, don't realize that all of the randomized control trials on relaxing and getting pregnant that had been published up until 2016 were very heavily scrutinized and evaluated in something that's called a Cochrane view. And that Cochrane review found that every single one of those RCTs, there were 39 at the time, were so flawed and biased as to be unreliable. And I don't want to diminish the hard work that went into the design and the analysis and the writing up of those studies, but we should not be using that data to say anything about whether or not stress plays a role in fertility or pregnancy loss. And all of the randomized control trials since that time have either found no significant relationship between stress and fertility or also have been seriously flawed, right? And we should note that typically only studies that show a correlation actually get published. So all the studies historically that showed that stress played no role likely just sat in somebody's file drawer and never got
Really?
published. Yep.
That breaks
But
my heart.
I know. It breaks my
We
it
need
breaks
we
mine too.
need
I want all of it. Yeah.
we need that out.
Right. We do. Somebody needs to, and it's not easy to do a randomized control trial, but I would love to see somebody do it. But the reason why I think this research exists, certainly as scientists, I mean, all of us as scientists would probably say we're nerds. And we all want to know the answer to something, right? But it's not just scientists who want the answer. It's patients too, and it's society too. We have all likely been lied to starting as teenagers. And we are told it is so easy to get pregnant that you have to work really, really hard to not get pregnant or not get someone pregnant. And throughout our lives, people tend to tell the easy stories, the whoops, I missed one birth control pill, what have you, right?
Yeah.
Nobody's running around telling the stories of being drunk in the back of a pickup truck and not getting pregnant. We keep those stories to ourselves, right?
Right. Yeah.
So as we grow up, we just hear these easy stories and we hear our doctors telling us that it's easy too. And then when it's not easy for at least 1 in 6 of us, we're scratching our heads and our friends and family are scratching their heads because it was easy for this person and this person and this person. And the thing that we've come up with to explain why it's not easy for you in particular is that it must be your fault.
Yep.
You must be doing something wrong. And if you just fix the thing that you're doing wrong, then it'll be easy to get pregnant because it's easy to get pregnant. And that's the problem. We want to believe the lies that we've been told. We want to believe that it's easy to get pregnant. And we want to believe that we have greater control over fertility than we actually do. Because if it's not as easy as we've been told, and if I don't have the control over my fertility that I'd like to have, then that means that fertility is inherently unfair. And it means that really good people who would be really amazing parents are going to struggle.
Yep.
And it also means that there's plenty of people out there who should never have children, like people who abuse kids, and they can blink their freaking eyes and have as many kids as they want. And we don't want that to be fair. So we kick ourselves and other people down and say, you should just relax, because it is so anxiety provoking to accept that stress doesn't. At least there is no research, literally no rigorous or good is what that means, research that shows that stress plays any kind of role. But at the same time, you'll have people say, well, but my mother's sister's cousin's best friend got drunk, went on vacation, adopted a baby, and had a baby, right? Everybody's got those stories. And my first thought is, that's interesting. How come we're not sharing the stories of all the folks who did all that and didn't get pregnant?
Right. Which is probably more.
Right. So we're only sharing the stories we want to hear because we want it to be true. We want to believe that we have this level of control. But we've got research on other, allegedly relaxing experiences. We've got research on chances of getting pregnant after you adopt. A very small percentage of people go on to get pregnant after they adopt. It's about 5. I mean, there's various studies, but the average is about 5%. And those are people, the research shows, who had a less severe fertility diagnosis, got new sperm, right? Either a new donor or a new partner, and were generally young and continued to have appropriately timed, unprotected heterosexual intercourse in that particular case, right? So those were the people who never had a 0% chance in the first place. right?
Mm.
Or we have research on people who got pregnant while they were waiting to start fertility treatment or had stopped fertility treatment. Same chance of success, exact same story. It's the youngest folks with the more mild fertility diagnoses who might have gotten new sperm are the ones who were going to get pregnant. I would also go back and argue that parenthood is a chronic life stressor. So why in the world would adoption reduce anybody's that's
Oh,
beside the point.
yeah.
Yeah, I know. Um, and and there's a variety of other studies where people have actually dug deeper into the research to try and understand where all these anecdotal stories are coming from. And that's the general answer, is that the people who get pregnant on their own, or even with fertility treatment, um, are the people who were going to get pregnant anyway.
Right.
That whatever their medical issue was, it didn't mean that there was a 0% chance for them. But again, if those are the stories that we hear and we feel anxious because we've been told that we don't have the control that we thought, we're going to move towards wanting to believe that these other things work. And the bigger problem with all of that is there are people out there that will take your money.
Yep.
They
Yeah.
will
Yes.
sell you
Yeah.
something that's going to help you relax. They will sell you a supplement. They will sell you a service. They will say, just open your wallet and we'll take it out, because
Yep.
they're preying on people who are
Yeah.
vulnerable in these
Yep.
moments. And so victim blaming women for their stress, and that is what it is. It's victim blaming, right? Sets those women up to experience more harm.
Mhm.
Even if there were research that could ever actually prove, which I really highly doubt, if there was research that could ever prove that stress caused infertility, it is far more harmful to tell someone that stress causes infertility and far more relaxing to tell them it doesn't. So even if
Yeah.
we ever said it, nope, we know it for truth, which I really think there's a 0% chance of that. But I'm a scientist, so I have to leave a 1% door open. It's just not helpful to tell
Yeah.
somebody to relax. And then you're exactly right, Ashlee. Then we start worrying about our worry, and it's this vicious cycle.
Yeah.
And the thing that really got me into the research in this area, because I actually accidentally got into fertility work. It was not my career path. Was within that first week of seeing patients, every single patient that would sit on my couch and would walk me through the story of trying to grow their family would start crying, often uncontrollably, when they told me that it was also so hard to be in the fertility clinic because it was their fault, that they were
Mm.
too stressed. And their partners are hearing the same stories, right?
Yep.
And so their partners might be also feeding back to them, yeah, you need to relax. This is your fault. It's your fault that
Mm.
we as a couple can't get, that's not healthy,
No.
right?
Yeah.
And I just saw so many people crying. I'm like, I'd heard the same stories. I thought maybe it is true. I'd never done research in this area until I started working in the clinic. And I thought, okay, I'm the nerd. I want to know. I want to see what the research says. And I very quickly, just in scratching the surface, realized, oh my gosh, we got a problem here. We've been lying or facilitating or helping this lie that it's stress. And also, why are we only blaming women for their stress? Allegedly, sperm
Yeah.
plays a role in getting pregnant. Now,
Allegedly.
yeah, I
Maybe.
know. I don't want us to start blaming men either, but it's also really misogynistic
Yeah.
Yeah.
to only target women
And I
for
think
their
that's
difficulties.
I think in general in the fertility, right? We
Oh
know we
Yeah.
know that it's 50% male, 50% female, right? But I think most people assume that that infertility is a female problem.
yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That was actually going to be one of my questions for you was, is anybody researching the male side? Like, have we
Oh
even
yeah.
considered or thought, or yeah, has anyone even done that on the stress perspective?
So there's a little bit of research. The research for men looks more at oxidative stress instead of emotional or psychological stress. There is a little bit of research on emotional stress and men and fertility. It's the same chicken or the egg argument. Did, for example, their low testosterone cause their anxiety or depression, or did their anxiety and depression cause their low testosterone? Again, we can't conduct a randomized controlled trial, but I would say similarly, the research there does not tend to support that stress and anxiety have a biologic role in male factor fertility concerns. The only potential direct biologic cause associated with stress and infertility for women would be functional hypothalamic amenorrhea, that is caused solely by stress. But functional hypothalamic amenorrhea is often, at least an associated factor, a dietary factor,
Right.
being extraordinarily underweight, right?
Yeah.
But otherwise, there's not been shown to be a direct link for either men or women between being stressed and difficulty getting pregnant. Now, being stressed might affect you dropping out of fertility treatment, which could affect your chances of getting pregnant, or being stressed might lead you to um, maybe not adhere fully to medical treatment or medical recommendations, which might affect your chances of getting pregnant.
Yeah.
Or being stressed might reduce your libido or interest in having sex, which might reduce your chance of getting pregnant. But none of those are a direct biologic. The stress is changing your hormones. It's the stress is changing your behavior
Yeah.
Right.
that could affect pregnancy. So stress isn't good. I mean, I'm a psychologist. I have to, you know, like nobody wants to experience stress, and the more stress we have, the harder it is to cope with. But
Yeah.
again, I just go back to, if we mere mortal women had the ability to affect the survival of our species by simply being stressed, not only would we be dead, we wouldn't need abortion, right?
Right.
We wouldn't
That was
need,
what I was going to say.
yeah,
I tell
we wouldn't
patients
need
that
birth
all the
control.
time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
birth control is unnecessary at that point as well.
Yeah.
I mean, from an evolutionary perspective, if a species is going to survive, it has to be designed in a way that prevents us from screwing it up, because we would screw it up if we could screw it up. Right? Who didn't party too hard in college, right?
Right.
Who's not stressed as an adult trying to balance relationships and work and the world on fire, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then throw fertility treatment into the mix. Oh,
Right.
Yeah.
So we've talked a lot about, right, that association or lack thereof association between stress causing infertility, but we know the flip side to be very true, right? That infertility and fertility
causes stress.
treatments causes stress, depression, anxiety. And so how do we, as people who are supporting going individuals going through treatment, like how do we support them through this? How do
Yeah.
we help them reduce their stress? I mean, and I think, as much as I'm sure you tell patients, as much as I tell patients, as much as Ashlee tells patients, that it doesn't impact your outcome, I think there's still going to be that level of
sure.
skepticism there.
Sure. And I think that's true. I think for some people, certainly when I share the research with them, they start crying for a different reason and are so thankful to hear that it's not their fault. And yet there's still going to be this nagging suspicion, even for that patient, that, but maybe, right? And
Maybe
so
I'm the outlier.
yeah, right. And
Yeah.
so I say to patients, do what makes you happy. If you want to eat a pineapple core, eat a pineapple core. I don't care. Eat McDonald's
Yeah.
French fries, right? Do something relaxing. Let's do it, right? But I do try and help them remove what I call inappropriate guilt, understanding that it's, as best as we can, that it's not their fault. But in terms of supporting patients, when you're going through fertility treatment, there's some realistic stressors that you're not going to be able to decrease. And so the focus is also often on surviving the stresses that you are facing, right?
Yep.
That it's not your fault if you do feel stressed while you're going through this. That's the unfortunate normal experience, to feel stressed, right? And to talk to them about strategies that could be helpful for managing their stress, whether it's going off social media. If I could turn the freaking internet off when people are going through fertility treatment, I would.
Yeah.
Or muting or unfollowing certain accounts, especially with lots of baby photos, not going to baby showers, certainly not hosting baby showers, reminding them that they're not jealous just because they have sad or upset feelings when they see somebody pregnant. When they see somebody who's pregnant, it's like poking at their open wound,
Yeah.
and that's
Yep.
why it makes them feel sad, not because they're a bad person. I'm a psychologist. I encourage therapy for people who might benefit from therapy. I think about who's in your support network, who actually provides good support, because not all support is good support. So maybe you don't talk to
Yep.
your mom about going through fertility treatment, or maybe you do, right? But how do we also communicate with family and friends in a way that gets us the support that we need? I'm a big fan of something called the feedback sandwich, and it's positive, negative, positive. So positive is sandwiching that negative.
Oh yeah, I've heard it like a burger. I feel like
Yeah, yeah,
teachers do this. It's like
Yeah.
yes,
they get a
yes.
burger email.
Right, right.
Your kid's
Uh,
great, but he did this today.
you're like, oh no, I can see where this is going. You're starting with something good.
Yeah.
But like for family who is well-meaning, hopefully, but nosy or giving unwanted, unsolicited advice about fertility, saying something along the lines of, I love you so much, and I really appreciate how supportive you've been of me or us in trying to grow our families. I'm sure you know how stressful it can be, experiencing infertility, pregnancy loss, going through fertility treatment. And one of the things that we have learned along the way is how hard it can be when people give us well-meaning but unsolicited advice, or ask us where we're at in fertility treatment, or ask us how we're doing with infertility, or whatever it might be. And so one of the things that we're thinking about, and would really like to request of you, and this can all be via text and it can be a group text, is that going forward, would you mind not asking us how we're doing or where we're at, or giving us unsolicited advice? Because we also want it to be a surprise for you when we're pregnant. And now
I
we've
like
made it
that
about the
angle.
other
Yeah.
person, and they're
Yeah.
like more willing to buy into this, right? So
Yeah.
would you be willing to not ask us any of these things until if and when we bring it up first? And oftentimes family or friends will say, absolutely, because now again, we've made it about their future excitement. And sometimes people will forget we've had this conversation, and we have to go back and say, hey, remember how we said blah, blah, blah. And then we finish it up with, thank you so much. I really have appreciated all the support that you've given me or us along the way.
I love that.
That's such a good reframe.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that because I remember when I was going through treatment, it was like anytime I had a failure, I felt like I was not only failing
Mm,
myself, my spouse, like I was failing my family. I remember when I
mm,
had a miscarriage, and I remember just thinking, gosh, I wish I hadn't told anybody, because now I feel the weight of everybody else's like, oh, I'm so sorry. And while I totally appreciate everyone around me like supporting me, it also just felt like I was, it was a disappointment
right.
for not only me but for them too.
Yeah. Well, and I think that also comes in the language that we use in medicine. So you bring up an interesting word, miscarriage. And there are other interesting medical terminologies for the different things associated with fertility. An incompetent cervix,
Mm,
right? There's a variety of these kinds of terms
geriatric
that
pregnancy.
are pretty
Yes.
they're pretty labeling for women,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? That they're saying there's something wrong with you, and it may not sound like miscarriage. Sounds like there's some negative connotation, but miscarry sounds like
Yeah.
you did something wrong.
Yeah.
You
Yeah. Yeah.
missed carrying, right? Which is why I also say that women don't miscarry, embryos do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was something wrong with that embryo, even in RPL, so recurrent pregnancy loss. There was a study that was published in 2025, it was early 2025, really kind of questioning whether RPL was a thing, in the sense, not does someone have potentially multiple pregnancy losses, and is that emotionally difficult? Oh, heck yeah, right? But is it the woman's fault in the context of even recurrent chromosomally normal embryo transfer with recurrent pregnancy loss? And what they showed in that study is, if you had, which is, this is a feat, I understand it as I'm going to say this, but if you have at least 5 euploid or chromosomally normal embryos, even if you transfer the first 4 chromosomally normal embryos, and those first 4 result in no pregnancy or pregnancy loss, if you have a 5th euploid embryo, by the 5th euploid embryo transfer, it's something like 98% of women got pregnant and had a baby, which suggests an embryo problem,
Yes.
not
Yeah.
a uterine problem.
Yeah.
But the way we talk about this, not just about stress, but just the medical terminology and the limits to our research and the language that we use, has subtle and overt blame on women that leads to this, you know, stigmatizing nature of infertility and pregnancy loss. And then so many people suffer in silence and feel like they can't talk to their friends or family. I've had so many patients who've said to me over the years, I can't tell so and so that I had a pregnancy loss because the last time I did, their first words out of their mouth were, "What did you do? Did you
Oh my
exercise too
gosh.
much? Did you eat the right or wrong thing?" Right? Who would want to tell anybody that they're struggling to grow their family if that's what you expect to hear from
Mm-hmm.
other
Yeah.
people?
Yeah.
We have
Oh
to do
my.
better. And I will say, you know, I was at Northwestern for almost 16 years. Obviously, I left and I started a private practice. We really need to have mental health professionals embedded in, and multiple mental health professionals embedded in every single fertility
Yeah.
treatment center,
Yeah.
in OBGYN offices, to support people who are trying to grow their families and it's not working the way that they had always hoped and dreamed.
I sent you know, I was astounded, right? Because being in Chicago, working at Northwestern, and the other clinic I worked at, we had psychologists on staff. As I've stepped out of the clinic role and into this more coaching and support role, I've worked with clinics across the country, patients at clinics across the country, and I've just been astounded that there are so many clinics that don't have a psychologist or social worker or someone on staff. They aren't even giving their patients necessarily referrals. And I also think, you know, is there a large number of psychologists, social workers who are trained in this specialty? Because I would love to like get your perspective on, you know, I think a lot of people see therapists. Now we have things online like there's like all kinds of like AI. Well, AI is a therapist, but there's
Sure, sure.
online like Headway or something like that where you can just see someone online
Yeah.
at any point.
Yeah.
But they're not necessarily trained in this area of expertise.
Correct.
I guess
Nor
I
is
just made two
everyone.
totally
Yeah.
different points, but
No, 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 no. You didn't. They're related. I'm going to bring it together for you.
okay,
So it is getting easier and easier to find a therapist, and there's good in that. There's also bad in that,
right.
because you don't know if the therapist has received the appropriate training that would be helpful for you, right? And it's really hard as a layperson to figure out who's an appropriately trained mental health professional. There's a lot of people that I've talked to over the years who are absolutely shocked that there are mental health professionals who specialize in reproductive mental health, right? There's folks who practice solely, for example, as fertility psychologists, and people are like, wait, what's a fertility psychologist, right? I have multiple subspecialty training areas. Fertility psychology is one of them as well. But what I will say is, even within the field, there's people who say they've got appropriate training in reproductive mental health, who their training consisted of them going through fertility treatment.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah,
And that is helpful. I'm not knocking lived experience, right?
100%.
But
Hmm.
that's very different than understanding the research, and understanding the science behind the medicine, and understanding the diversity of experiences that people going through fertility treatments might have. Just because
Yes.
I did IVF or I did egg freezing or I did IUI, or whatever it might be. And so there's a group, Laura, I think you've mentioned ASRM earlier in our conversation. So the American Society for Reproductive Medicine is the medical society that provides guidance to those of us who have specialty in reproductive medicine and reproductive mental health. And ASRM has a subgroup that is called the MHPG, which is the Mental Health Professional Group of ASRM. And within that group, there's probably about 600 actual appropriately trained mental health professionals who have specialty in reproductive mental health. And you can actually go to the ASRM.org website, and there's a patient resources link at the top of the page, and you can do find a ASRM member, and you can specifically look for mental health professionals in your state, etc. And that might be a good first place to start looking to say, hey, is this person I'm seeing or thinking of seeing, are they a member or have they ever been a member? And if the person that you're seeing or want to see is not on that list, then messaging or asking that therapist, what is your specialty training
Yeah.
in reproductive mental health? What courses have you taken? What research have you done or read? Right? That that would potentially be helpful in narrowing down, is this person someone who actually knows enough about this unique and important area to not say something to me like you should just relax? Because I've heard of therapists saying that because they don't understand the
Yeah.
research, and now your therapist is causing you potential harm,
Yeah.
Yeah.
which that just guts me.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's so helpful that you mentioned that, because ways to find somebody that is appropriate, because as we all know, going through infertility or going through fertility treatment, we're already making so many decisions. There's
Mhm,
already so much going on.
mhm.
And there are so many people out there that you can find someone to, oh yeah, this person, they say they help with fertility. I need to make something easy for myself. This has all been super hard. I need something that's easy, and this person's on this list. So I'm
Mhm.
just going to schedule with them because they're on this list and they're easy, and I found
Yeah,
them and they say they do
yeah,
fertility. Done. Something off my checklist, because I already have a billion things going on.
right.
So I think it taking that, calling that out and taking that extra step just to make sure that you are speaking with somebody who is really qualified to have those conversations and really
Yeah,
help and support you, is so
yeah.
important.
Yeah.
And the other thing I'll say too, just for people who are looking, is that psychologists have something called PsyPact, PSYPACT. There's 40 plus states in the US that have basically agreed that for the psychologists who go through this kind of credentialing process, that we can practice in these 40 plus states. So I'm licensed in Illinois, but I can work with patients in other states. You don't necessarily have to find somebody in your state. There may not be, depending on the size of your state or your location, somebody in your area. So if you look for a psychologist who has reproductive mental health training, you might have better chances there. There is a compact for master's level clinicians. It is in its infancy ish. It's going to get bigger, and then more master's level clinicians will be able to do the same and practice across state lines. So if you find a master's level clinician, just check to see if they're in, it's called the compact, to see if they can practice in your state, even if they're in a different state. So there's a variety of ways to do this, and if nothing else, ask your clinic. Hopefully your clinic has a list. um, if they don't have a list, I would say I'd start with ASRM.
Yeah.
Can we get a little unfiltered here for a second?
Yeah, yeah.
In name of our podcast. Um, why do you think that clinics don't have more psychologists on staff? Why do we think that there's, I don't know if it's reluctance or what it is, to provide more emotional support to patients who are navigating treatment? But I would love like your perspective if you're comfortable being unfiltered.
I am comfortable being unfiltered, but uh, it's money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that's yes. And
Yeah,
Ashlee and I talk about that all the time. But
yeah.
Yeah.
yeah,
So mental health professionals, now especially that we have telehealth, we don't need to occupy physical space in a clinic, right?
right.
So it's not money from, the clinics are paying XYZ in rent and utilities for that office space. But mental health professionals, the bills that we generate, the revenue that we generate for a clinic is not going to come close, of course, to touching what a clinic can make from surgeries and so on. And while the cost of having a mental health professional on staff isn't very much, I think there's probably clinics who feel like, patients can just find their own, and then we don't have to deal with the stress of thinking about some of this kind of stuff. And I think that's a real failure on the part of clinics that I believe do care about the
Yeah.
mental health of the patients. I don't think that's why there's not mental health professionals. I think it's, our role is to help people get pregnant and on their way. And you don't need a psychologist to get somebody pregnant.
Yeah.
And from a medical perspective, that's true, obviously, based on everything that we've talked about today. But that doesn't mean that your patients don't need a mental health professional.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's just short-sighted on the part of clinics to not have embedded mental health professionals when all of us know how distressing infertility, pregnancy loss, and its treatment can be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. And I, Ashlee and I have talked about this before, but as clinics continue to merge and fall under these larger umbrellas, and there's private equity involved,
Mm-hmm.
I think we're going to see, unfortunately, less and less support. And I think there's some wonderful companies out there doing some really great things.
I agree.
And I think there's people out there doing awesome things, but I just, my understanding is some of the latest research has shown that the number one reason that people drop out of treatment is from the emotional distress. And
Correct.
yes, finances is a huge piece of it. And that is a
Sure.
huge issue in this country, that we do not have broad coverage for fertility treatments. But, coming from a little bit of that sector and working with financing, people will find a way. And I think people drop out because they feel emotionally unsupported. I just can't handle this. I mean, and I think about this, clinics are always looking at ROI, and where is the biggest drop off in patients? It's often from the new patient visit. They go to the new patient visit and then they never come back.
Mm-hmm.
What if we supported that patient after their new patient visit?
Mm-hmm.
What if wouldn't that ultimately return revenue to the clinic? Like, this is, but is it just that the industry is so stretched as it is, because there's such a demand for fertility care that they're like, well, where one patient leaves, we'll get another one.
I think that's probably part of it for some clinics in terms of the business people running those clinics. And again, I don't think that everybody is cold-hearted and not caring about patients, but
Absolutely
they are
not. Yeah.
businesses. They're businesses that they're trying to run, and that slows things down if patients need to see a mental health professional before they get started. And then how is that appointment with the mental health professional going to be covered? For example, the fertility clinic could just eat that cost. They don't, but they could.
Of course not. Yeah.
But in Illinois, with our fertility mandate, those appointments were largely covered by patients' insurance, and so there wasn't an extra cost. But these dropout rates we see even in fertility mandated states, and so it is stressful. And the desire to keep patients in treatment isn't necessarily revenue. Those are people who could potentially get pregnant and grow their families, who are leaving fertility treatment without a baby, in a way that could be devastating to them for the rest of their lives. And so there are ways, in my mind, to balance business operations, mental health support, caring for patients, making money, all those different things that have just not happened yet. And I think it's really going to have to come from patient advocacy. The call needs to come from inside the house, so to speak, right? Of, hey guys, this is the warning. You need to start supporting us going forward, or we are going to pick different clinics. And it hasn't quite happened yet, but
Yeah. I feel like I'm seeing that more and more out there now. I feel like more and more I'm seeing patients sort of sound that alarm, sort of say like, "Hey, my experience at the clinic matters."
yeah.
Someone told me the other day that I would rather have a good experience with a longer outcome than a terrible experience with a faster one.
Mm-hmm.
That's
There's
very
some
And
research on that. Yeah.
I think that really speaks volumes. And again, that's one person's opinion.
Yeah,
So, of
yeah.
course, people are going to have different opinions. But I think that speaks volumes. And I think a lot of people would agree that, hey, if it took me a little bit longer, but I had support, I had what I was looking for in a clinic, and I felt heard, and they did everything, and all those pieces. And then I got pregnant a little bit later. hey, I had a great experience, conceiving my child. Now, the same person's going to be happy that, had a terrible experience and still had their child, because that was obviously the outcome. But yeah, it's a very interesting concept of the patient experience
Mhm.
piece of it. And I think that is a huge gap that Laura and I have talked about, and Dr. Lawson, that you mentioned. That's a gap in fertility care right now. Absolutely. The actual experience piece, instead of just getting people in and kind of getting people out.
Right.
Well, and I worry about, I love AI. I think AI has some great, wonderful things that it's going to do. But I just worry so much about, I see a lot of people trying to build AI like chat models to
Mhm.
support people through treatment. Or I've
Mhm.
had patients tell me that they've been talking to ChatGPT. I hear that more and more and more. And I'm like,
Mhm.
ChatGPT does not know you.
Mm-mm.
Yeah.
And it's not a replacement for mental health
No,
and support.
no. I mean,
Yeah.
the digital technologies are definitely going to be more and more integrated into therapy, and maybe there'll be a day where chatbot therapy is actually good, and not extremely risky. Um, we're not quite there. I imagine someday it'll get there. Some people will still prefer human to human interaction for therapy. Some people will prefer digital, and I think that's fine. Again, as long as that we're at a place where the research shows that it's a, a healthy way to engage in therapy. So certainly when before I'm a little old lady in a rocking chair, I'm sure I'll see that. We're just not quite there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Um,
oh,
no,
go
go ahead,
ahead,
Laura.
Ash. No, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, I was gonna pivot completely 90 degrees. I had a question for you, that I would love to hear just your thoughts on, because I think it's something really big in social media and just out there in general. And you briefly mentioned cortisol, right?
Yeah.
But I think social media and everybody has sort of turned cortisol into this marketing gimmick,
Mm.
whether it's infertility or outside of it.
Hmm.
So I would love if you could speak to, cortisol in general. If somebody is looking to, some fertility clinics will test cortisol and things
Hmm.
like that. Best ways to lower it, not drinking this powder and doing this and things like that.
Hmm.
How, people that are, they're asking the questions about the
Yeah.
cortisol and not falling for those gimmicks, because we
Yeah.
know that is a stress hormone, right? So we can't deny that. But I would love your thoughts on what's out there in the world right now in regards to that, and what are some realistic things that we could give our listeners in regards to cortisol.
So what I will say is a lot of the research that exists doesn't even show that relaxing drops cortisol levels, and that like the psychological measures that are being included in studies don't even correlate with cortisol levels. In the world of reproduction, it's fairly fascinating to think about cortisol, because cortisol rises and falls not just with emotional stress, but cortisol rises and falls throughout the course of a menstrual cycle, regardless of somebody's stress level. It increases the older we get, right? It increases through perimenopause and menopause, which of course are difficult or impossible times to get pregnant with our own eggs anyway. And so even if somebody had an elevated cortisol level, it doesn't mean that the elevation is because of emotional stress. It could
It's a good
simply
call out.
be because of our age, or again, where we're at in our menstrual cycle. And the same thing is true with alpha amylase, which is another stress hormone, or hormone that can be increased in times of stress, but it's also increased in age and throughout the course of a menstrual cycle. There's a variety of other things that can affect our cortisol levels as well, including things like exercise, right? It
Yeah.
can go up, right, during exercise. And there's some research that shows that an elevated cortisol level is actually helpful for getting pregnant in some cases. Now, again, all of these things have interesting studies, have interesting research designs that have their pluses and minuses. But the ultimate answer is, unless you have a disease that your physician has diagnosed you with, and unless your physician just outright tells you you need to do X, Y, or Z. And I think we always want to think about second opinions. If your physician is saying you don't need to do anything, we don't think it's going to affect your chances of getting pregnant, then that's what your physician is saying. And that your physician, from their core and the Hippocratic Oath, they don't want to do any harm. So they're not going to tell you to not do something that could help you get pregnant. They, again, want you to be able to get pregnant. It helps their pregnancy rates and helps you feel good as well. That I think really listening to your medical provider's advice, and again, if you're uncomfortable or uncertain with that advice, getting a second opinion about it. But if again, these supplements that are sold in varying ways increased people's chances of getting pregnant, the setup at a fertility clinic or even at an OBGYN's office would be different. There'd be these instructions about here's how much you can exercise and exactly what you can do. Here's what you can eat and here's what you can't eat. And here's the deep breathing activity you have to do every day for 10 minutes. And right, like it would just all be set up in different ways, because those things, deep breathing or eating this or that, are fairly straightforward things theoretically that we could do. And yet again, even the people who are trying to control the uncontrollables, right, who are changing their diets, changing their exercise, engaging in acupuncture, doing every relaxing thing they can, they're not magically getting pregnant. They're still in fertility clinics.
Yeah.
Or again, we wouldn't need fertility clinics if these strategies worked. But if it's going to make you feel better and it doesn't harm you, like if you want to take some supplement, please ask your healthcare professional first. Say, hey, look, here's the thing that I saw on TikTok that I want to take. Do you think it's okay for me to take it? And listen to what they're telling you, and listen to the research that they're going to talk to you about, or the lack of research available on that particular supplement and the risks associated with that. That your clinic, from both a medical ethics, a cynical approach, and just as a human being caring for somebody else, they don't want to discourage you from doing something that's not going to work.
Yeah.
They want you to get pregnant. They want to add you to their win column, right? They want you to be healthy. They want you to be happy. They're not going to give you contradictory advice. Listen to them.
Yeah.
They're the expert.
Yeah. I love that.
ChatGPT thinks it's an expert, but
I just keep seeing, and you mentioned it, and it's one of the things you look at when doing studies and research. And, I think people hear cortisol and people don't fully understand what that even means, just because they're seeing it through the lens of social media and what they're seeing on the internet, right? Which is not helpful at all, because that's not the full picture.
Yeah.
No, I am thankful that we are starting to see a change, and within the last few years, about the way that people talk about stress. I've been on some Reddit threads, or whatever you call them. I'm not the most hip and happening with technology. But I really see other people jumping into comments when somebody says, oh, you should just relax. And people are like, what are you talking about? Stop saying that. That's not true. There's no research that supports that. And I do the same thing. I'm like a LinkedIn warrior, that if I see a healthcare professional saying that ever in threads or LinkedIn or anywhere, I jump in with a paragraph about what the research actually shows, because I'm not going to let a health professional that I see further a myth that's harming people.
Yeah.
Usually there's no comment after I post it.
Of course. Yeah.
It's fine. I'll be that person.
Yeah. Well, this has been, I feel like we could keep talking forever. Because it's just such a like an important topic. And I just love all of the takeaways from today's episode. Can you share with us like how patients can find you? Are you seeing patients right now? Like how can we direct people to you?
That is lovely of you. Yes, I do see patients. So I am physically located in Illinois. I do have an office, so if people live here and want to come in person, but they can go to my website, which is How did I just forget what it is? It's oh my gosh, now let me look it up. That's so
Isn't
funny.
it drlawsonconsulting.com?
Yes, it's Dr. Lawson. I was like, does Angela know? It's drlawsonconsulting.com, or they can just send me an email.
Okay.
It's alawsonphd@drlawsonconsulting.com.
Perfect. Well, we'll put that in the show notes as well. But is there any I think we've gotten a lot in this episode, but is there any final takeaway that you want to leave with our audience?
Oh gosh, my final takeaway would be that there are so many of us in the field and just out there in the world who know how emotionally difficult all of this is, and understand how scary it is to share with other people what you're going through. And yet I hope that you have at least one person in your life that you can talk to about how you're feeling, who is not going to be judgmental, and is actually going to be supportive, and or that you're able to better identify a mental health professional that could be of support to you. But if nothing else, at the end of the day, even if there's not somebody in your support network you talk to, or if you're not open to going to therapy, and that is what it is, my hope would be that when you hear yourself saying judgmental things about, it's my fault, I can't get pregnant because of X, Y, or Z, that you would think about what you would say to a best friend if you heard her say that. What would you say back to her and believe to be true? Can't just be trying to make her feel better. If you heard your best friend say, this is my fault, I'm a bad person, a bad partner, or whatever, because I can't get pregnant because of stress or whatever, my bet would be you'd look at her and be like, don't talk to my best friend that way. And I would hope that you could speak to yourself in the same way.
I love it.
I love that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. And I can't wait to air this episode. And and if you're listening, hit that like, subscribe, check us out on YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. So thanks, everyone. We'll see you next
time.
If this conversation resonated, like, comment, or subscribe, share, send us your questions. Nothing is off limits.
And wherever you are in your journey, know this: you deserve support that's real and human. Never forget to ask your questions, advocate louder, and remember, you're not crazy. Fertility is hard.
That's it for today's episode of Fertility Nurses Unfiltered. Thanks for spending your time with us today.
We'll see you next time.